describe desperation to someone who is not desperate began a letter to me from U.S. political prisoner Ojiri Lutulo, who went on to depict everyone in the management control unit at Trenton State being woken up at 1 o'clock in the morning by guards dressed in riot gear, holding dogs. This country was born out of genocide. That's the political genesis of this slavery system. It's the political genesis of the prison system. I made a promise to myself when I was very young to live a principled way of life, a way of life that I could be proud of. I'm exhausted from it, but it's brought me a lot of richness. Where you gonna run to? Shortly after World War II, it was my grandmother, my uncle, my brother, myself, my mother, my father, and very close by were a host of aunts and uncles and cousins. It was a communal atmosphere. My grandmother always seemed to me as a child to be a very strong woman. She raised 7 children. She was divorced in an era when women did not get divorced. Very full of life. My mother was a typical woman of the 50s who emphasized things looking good, being dressed well. So it was two very, very different visions of women. I chafed against who my mother was. When my parents were able to economically, I was about 9, they moved to Queens. And I was and remained extremely lonely. There was a sense of isolation in me as a child, moving from that collective atmosphere to an isolated atmosphere. I don't know that I thought about it, having the feeling of loneliness. When I was 12 on these little 10-inch television sets, what I saw was children, those very young children, being hosed with fire hoses by white men, white adults. I saw them being bitten, the kids were screaming. That was an enormous imprint on me. I began to volunteer at the University Settlement House on the Lower East Side. I met the first gang members I had ever met in my life. I met my first kids of color. I met my first heroin addict. I met my first politically astute kids. I was 14, and it was the gift of being mentored by other 14-year-olds who I could listen to much more readily than adults. I met my first community organizers there. The people who trained me were women. They were strong African women. Women are the backbone of most social change. The tenant movements, the welfare rights movement was all women. The Democratic Freedom Party was hugely women. The Panthers, Elaine Brown, and then later on Asada. The women's movement was exploding. The anti-war movement was exploding. The really African-led lesbian rights movement was exploding. I worked with each of these groups in any number of ways. I had Vietnam vets staying at my house, and they had no place else to go, the ones who came to Jersey to organize. The welfare rights women, I sat at their knees learning from them. I had nothing to offer them. They were mentors. I was very aware of what was happening to my generation. I was very conscious of the emergence of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. I was very conscious of the American Indian movement. This was maybe in my 20s, watching government forces, watching Chicago City Police kill people my own age. They killed people all over the country who were Black Panthers. The FBI shot young people on the reservations who were wanting self-determination. Jackson State and Kent State campuses, kids who were protesting the war, they killed them. A lot of folks had stopped organizing. A lot of those movements were very disheartened. I thought of the right to defend oneself. They were killing my generation and a little bit later imprisoning it. It wasn't until I met the people in prison that I had someone to talk to through the mentorship and encouragement of some of the other political prisoners to educate myself about my white skin privilege, the infiltration of white supremacy in me, to understand my own oppression. Once that clicked in with me, I was able to, which I had never ever done before, I was able to go out and speak on behalf of those people in prison. I understood the bottom line place, politically, and the bottom line place economically, how prisons function in this society. I was able to give a voice to people who were voiceless, and I was able to be a voice. And that was internally a profoundly different experience. I was empowered in a way that I had never been empowered before. I coordinate the Prison Watch Project for the American Friends Service Committee Healing Justice Program out of Newark, a reflector of the testimonies of human rights violations beyond anyone's wildest understanding that come in to me every single day. And it's men, women, it's children, and of color. And what they're enduring. So I have to be true to their voice. A big part of what I'm doing now is asking white folks to reflect on their own racism, which is very hard for whites to do, particularly left-wing whites. If you grew up in this country with white skin, you are a white supremacist. You drop pebbles. I don't know where that pebble, that germ of knowledge is going to end up. Set an example, teach where you can, choose good mentors. Sometimes it's not that we don't have mentors, it's that we don't recognize them. There's something to be learned from everybody.
Neither have I wings to fly. Give me a boat that can carry two, and both shall row